And here we go. Ma'am, we've heard some testimony. You were Lacy Peterson's mother, is that right?
Yes, I am.
And Lacy's father was Dennis Rocha.
Yes, he is.
And you and Dennis were married from when to when?
1969 to 1976.
And you divorced, is that right?
That's correct.
And you and Ron Grantiski have been together since basically what time?
The end of 1977 till now.
To the present?
Yes.
And when Lacy was growing up, how old was Lacy when you and Dennis divorced?
She was 1.
1 years old?
Yes, she was.
And then when you and Ron started being together, Lacy was how old?
2.
And did Lacy live in your home during the time that she was growing up?
Yes, she did.
And what city was that in?
Where Lacy grew up.
Uh-huh.
Modesto.
And what schools did she attend? Just briefly tell me.
She went to Sonoma School,
Okay.
La Loma Junior High School, Downey High School, and Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo.
And don't tell me the address or anything like that, but what part of Modesto do you live in, just geographically? Where in the city?
East Modesto.
Okay, and have you lived in that location? Have you lived in that location where you are now for all of Lacy's growing up period?
Almost.
These folks don't, unless they've lived in Modesto, they don't really have any idea about where Modesto is because we're not there. Can you just give them some idea of just what kind of town Modesto is, just briefly, and where, what kind of environment Lacy grew up in?
Modesto is just a normal everyday town. It's not anything unusual or different than any other city. The environment Lacy grew up in was just middle class. She did all the normal things. Her friends were normal people, and she was not someone who was in trouble or a problem child at all.
Work do you do?
I'm a loan officer.
And what type of work does Ron do?
He's a construction superintendent.
So he works in the construction field and you work as a loan officer.
That's correct.
All right, and have you both been doing that for pretty much, many years?
Yes.
So those were the jobs that you had when Lacy was growing up.
Originally, no. I started out in 92.
What, I haven't asked anybody this yet. What is Lacy's birth date?
5475.
And do you remember what year it was that Lacy graduated from high school?
1993.
And when did she leave for college?
She left in, I believe it was August of 93.
And where did she go to school?
Cal Poly.
For college, Cal Poly?
San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly, yes.
You know what year it was in college when she met the defendant, Scott Peterson.
To the best of my recollection, it was at December of 94.
And you recognize Mr. Peterson as he sits in court here today.
Yes, I do.
Okay, when did you first meet him?
The summer of 94, shortly after Lacy first met him, or first dated him, I should say.
Can you tell me about that meeting?
She had called me and she was excited about having met Scott and she wanted me to meet him. So I went to San Luis Obispo to spend the weekend with her. We had plans to go to the cafe where Scott worked and have dinner.
Let me stop you right there. I was talking a little more detailed. Do you know if Scott Peterson was going to college at that time?
I was told he was not at that time.
Right, go ahead. So you went to the cafe where he was working.
Yes, and we had arrived a little bit early, so we parked the car in the parking lot and then we walked along the Embarcadero and then we came back and Scott greeted us at the door. He saw us walking towards the restaurant, so he greeted us at the door and then he went inside. He told Lacy that he had a special table waiting for her and there were a dozen red roses on the table for her and a dozen white roses for me. We were seated and had dinner.
All right, so you sat and had dinner at the cafe.
Yes.
And this was what year?
94.
And did you basically know the defendant and Lacy? You know, kind of how the relationship progressed from that period on.
As far as, yes, steadily dating and until they were engaged and then they were married.
Okay, how long did they date, do you know, before they were engaged?
They met, like I said, I believe it was December of 94 and they married August of 97. So it would have been 3 years or right at 3 years.
And their marriage, they were married in San Luis Obispo.
at Avila Beach.
Is that on the coast down there?
Yes, it's very near San Luis Obispo.
After, do you know what year it was that Lacy graduated from college?
97. She graduated in December of 97.
Or you said August of 97 they were married?
Yes.
Okay, after they were married, did they live apart to your knowledge for some period of time?
Yes, just after Lacy graduated, I believe it was in January. It could have been February of 98. She moved to Prunedale. She took a position with a company out of Richmond, and her territory was Monterey, Carmel, Salinas area. She lived in Prunedale at that time.
And do you know where the defendant was living at that time?
He was still in San Luis Obispo. He hadn't graduated yet. He was going to stay at San Luis Obispo until June of 98 when he graduated.
Okay, do you know if he did? Then he graduated in June of 98.
Yes.
Where did Lacy and Scott go after they both graduated? Did they move back to Modesto immediately?
Now, after Scott graduated, the original plan was for Scott to come to the Bay Area
Uh-huh.
to be employed there, but for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And so Lacy moved back to San Luis Obispo. And at that time, I believe at that time was when they were working. Scott's parents had given him part of their business. And at some time they sold that and they opened their own business, the Shack in San Luis Obispo. And then in June of 2000, they moved back to Modesto.
You said they were given kind of part of the box business there.
Yes,
And did they run that, or did the defendant run that for a while?
that is my understanding. Yes.
Did you really have anything to do with that?
No, I didn't.
All right, and then they owned a restaurant.
Yes.
And what, you said it was the Shack?
Yes.
And how long do you know did they own that for?
I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, I knew Scott graduated in June of 98. They moved back to Modesto in June of 2000, maybe a year and a half or so.
And after they sold that business?
Yes, they did.
And then they sold that business and moved back to Modesto.
Yes.
What, during this time that Lacy was living in San Luis Obispo, what was your relationship with her?
We were very close. We talked to each other all the time. I would go down to visit there or she would come home.
So you had a normal mother-daughter relationship?
Yes.
There was no period of time when you were estranged or anything like that?
No, not at that time.
Okay, and so what you would call her, correct?
Yes, or she would call me.
And she would call you?
She would call me more often.
She called you more?
Yes.
How long do you think during that period of time you were talking to her?
In the beginning, when she first went down there, we probably talked, if not every day, at least every other day.
And then after she moved back to Modesto, where did they move? She and the defendant, where did they move to?
When they first came back, they spent the first couple of weeks with us at our house. And I believe it was July 1st when they moved to the home on Mesquite Avenue. And then they bought their house and escrow closed in October of 2000.
So they bought the house in October. When you're talking about the house, you're talking about 523 Covina.
Yes, I am.
So they moved into the one house in roughly June of 2000.
July, I believe it was.
July?
I believe it was the 1st of July 2000.
And they lived there, to your knowledge, until escrow closed in October.
Yes.
Then they moved into the 523 Covina house.
Yes, it was supposed to close in September and that didn't happen. So it was just a few days into October when it closed and they moved in.
Briefly, just briefly, what was Lacy's jobs? Are you aware of what work she was doing while she was here in Modesto?
Yes.
What was she doing?
When she first came back, she was working as a marketing rep for Southern Wine and Spirits. And then after they moved into their home, that's when she started teaching
And was she a full-time teacher?
part-time,
A substitute?
a substitute teacher.
Do you know how often during the week she would substitute teach?
Actually, she worked almost every day.
And that was do you know what month that was?
I believe that may have been the end of October, November, around that time. I'm not exactly sure, but I know it was shortly after they moved into the house.
And what? And did you know how long she continued doing that?
Up until I believe around November of 2002,
And do you know why she stopped at substitute teaching?
because she was getting larger and uncomfortable and not feeling well, and her feet were swelling a lot, and she wanted to start preparing more for the baby.
Okay, she had stopped teaching, substitute teaching in November because of her pregnancy was progressing.
Yes.
And of course, you saw her during this time, from the time she moved back to, basically in the end of her life. Did you see her fairly frequently?
Yes, I did.
And how often do you think you would physically see her?
I physically saw her at least once a week. We talked on the phone every other day, every couple days. Quite often, it would be more than once a week that we would see each other. We would shop together, go to the movies, have lunch together.
How far was your home from her home?
Just a matter of blocks, maybe. I don't know. I never actually measured. Half a mile,
How long would it take you to drive there?
5 or 6 minutes.
Are you familiar with what Lacy and the defendants, lifestyle was in Modesto? I mean, what kind of life were they leading?
Just normal life. They had their friends. I know they got together with their friends quite often, just did normal things.
Did either one, to your knowledge, engage in any kind of I guess we call it like high risk kind of behavior?
No, not to my knowledge.
I'm sorry, in 2002.
No.
And what I mean by that, was there any problems with drugs that you were aware of?
Not that I was aware of. I know Lacy was very aware of her health, especially being pregnant, and she was always very health conscious.
Did you know Lacy or the defendant to have any kind of psychiatric problems or any kind of problems that you heard of during 2002?
No.
When you say she was conscious of her health, were you aware of when she became pregnant?
Oh, yes.
Did she tell you?
Yes.
And this would have been your first grandchild.
No.
Oh, that's right. No, I'm sorry. Brent has a child. This would have been Lacy's first.
Lacy's first.
Right.
Yes.
Did Lacy, to your knowledge, take any kind of, the normal precautions that you take when you're pregnant?
Yes, I know she had talked about, trying to, well, she always did eat healthy. I know she told me, I believe they had taken two Lamaze classes. She had started a yoga class at some time, a prenatal yoga class. And in the beginning, I know that she was still walking.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about that in 1 second. So she was kind of doing the normal things that women do when they become pregnant. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
And you were aware that she was attending her prenatal appointments with her doctor
Yes.
and taking her vitamins and doing all of those kind of normal things.
Yes.
What did Lacy, before we leave, kind of what your relationship with her was, did she talk to you about when they would do things in their life?
Yes. Such as,
Let me give you some examples. We've heard some testimony that they went on a Carmel trip in December. Did she tell you they were going on that trip?
yes, she did.
And did she tell you when they were going to buy, for example, a new car
Yes.
or any other kind of major home purchases, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Would she tell you when they were doing any kind of remodeling work on their home?
Yes, they had put in a pool the year before, and I believe it was in 2002, and they put in a new air conditioning unit.
Did she tell you about all those things?
Oh, yes.
Was that just normal, everyday kind of life conversations with her?
Yes, it was.
Did she tell you when Scott Peterson joined the Del Rio Country Club?
Yes.
Do you remember when it was?
I believe it was November 4th. I was at her house having dinner when she mentioned that Scott had joined the country club.
Did, and all this time that they were together, you knew Scott Peterson well, is that right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
All the time that they were together, you also dealt with Scott Peterson, the defendant.
Oh, yes.
Okay, it wasn't like he disappeared for years at a time
No.
and you never saw him.
No.
And how would he refer to you as?
He called me mom.
And did he call you that from basically the time they were married?
Yes.
Are you aware of what his hobbies were? Well, let me put it this way. Did he ever talk to you about any of his hobbies?
I knew he liked to golf. I do know that. He built things. I know he had built a barbecue at their house, and he had talked about having gone fishing with his dad or pheasant hunting with his dad.
And these were things that he would tell you.
Yes.
And did he ever, were these like out of the ordinary things, or were these just normal everyday kind of conversation things? Do you understand the question? Well, can you answer it? Make it a little more specific. I'll go through each item. I'm trying not to drag it out here too much. Like, for example, like the barbecue. Was that just part of a normal conversation that you had with the defendant?
Yes, he and Lacy.
So all of these things that you just told us, this was your normal relationship with these two people.
Yes.
Did up until Lacy disappeared on the 24th, had you noticed any problems in the relationship? Anything that you saw that would lead you to believe that there was a problem between the two parties?
No, there wasn't anything that was obvious.
And up until sometime in the future, had you ever been told, or did you ever know from Lacy or the defendant that he'd been having an affair with a woman by the name of Amber Frey?
No.
Had you ever learned that he had had an affair with any woman?
No.
Did Lacy or the defendant at any time tell you that he had bought a boat?
No.
Did you even, or did you have any knowledge up until December 24th that the defendant owned a boat?
None whatsoever.
So I take it Lacy never mentioned that to you,
No.
and the defendant never mentioned that to you.
That's correct.
Now, you mentioned when we were talking about kind of the background of your relationship that you were aware that Lacy had started taking a yoga class as part of her pregnancy.
Yes.
Do you know what kind of yoga it was?
I know it was a prenatal, so it was for pregnant women.
So some kind, a pregnant woman class for yoga.
Right.
And you also said that earlier in the pregnancy, you were aware that she liked to walk.
Yes.
And do you know if she took the dog with her when she walked?
Yes, she did.
Did you personally actually ever walk with her?
Yes, I have.
How many times do you think you did that?
I remember at least 2 times.
And when you walked with her, was that at what stage in her pregnancy was that?
To be honest with you, I can't even say that she was pregnant the last time we walked. If she was pregnant, it was just in the very, very beginning of her pregnancy.
We've seen some pictures. I guess I can just show one here. Let me mark this next in order. It's a picture of Lacy Peterson. This is a picture of Lacy, right?
Yes.
This is obviously late in her pregnancy.
Yes.
When you were walking with her, was she at times when you went, was she even just showing her pregnancy at all?
Not at all.
So after she became visibly showing, I'm kind of trying to kind of date when you were walking with her. After she became visibly showing with her pregnancy, did you personally walk with her again?
No.
Now, you did hear from her that she had been beginning to walk. Is that right?
Yes.
What do you know where she would tell you that she would go?
Normally she went to the park.
And the park is near her house.
Yes, it is. She never told me she walked any other place other than the park.
Okay, when you walked with her, where did you walk?
In the park.
Did Lacy ever mention to you that she had changed her route and changed her route from the park to some other, location in the neighborhood or something?
No, she never mentioned that to me.
Did she talk to you about an incident where she got sick in the park?
Yes, she did.
Okay, do you remember when the first time it was that she talked about that?
It was the very end of October, very beginning of November, because she had called me. She had told me she had been walking in the park. She started to feel dizzy and then she started vomiting. And she was really embarrassed because the maintenance people from the park were like following her along, cleaning up after her. She was trying to get home as quickly as possible because she was afraid she was going to pass out.
Okay, and you were not with her when this happened.
No, she was alone.
She called you and told you about it.
Yes, she did.
And what did you tell her to do?
I told her to call her doctor immediately because I didn't think that sounded right, that there was something wrong, and she said that she would, but I don't think she did at the time. I think it was a few days later before she did call.
Okay, and did she then call you again and tell you about some other incident where she got sick in the park?
Yes, she did.
What did she tell you about that one?
That was probably about a week or so after the first time, and that's when she said she became very dizzy, that she sat down immediately so she didn't get sick, and as soon as she got up and walked home as soon as she possibly could. And then she had also told me that when she did talk to her doctor, they had told her that she should probably stop walking, but if she continued to walk, she should at least walk later in the day because she was probably dehydrated.
At this point in her pregnancy, was Lacy feeling the effects of her pregnancy?
Yes, she was.
What I mean by that is when you were talking about these incidences when she was getting sick in the park, was she visibly showing?
Oh, yes, she was.
Because this was October or November. And do you know when the baby was due in February?
Yes.
Do you know, was she talking to you at all about this time, the physical effects of her pregnancy?
At this time, yes, as time was going on, she was telling me, like I said, she was complaining. By mid-November, at least, maybe a little earlier, she was complaining about her feet swelling. She was having a hard time standing up for any length of time or walking. Her back was aching, and she seemed to be tired all the time.
You have had two children yourself, correct?
Yes,
And so you're familiar with the effects of pregnancy as it kind of rolls along.
yes.
Were the things she was telling you kind of the normal things of a late term pregnancy? I don't know if that's common for everybody, so I am not sure, but that's fine. So she told you about these incidents about walking in the park in late October or early November. And did she ever stop between that time and December 23rd? Okay. So the incident she talked about in the park around December 23rd, the last time being talked about, did she ever stop talking to you about walking in the park?
The last time we talked about walking in the park was the second time that she became ill, that she didn't feel well. Yes,
When you said she got dizzy.
yes.
So the second time since she got dizzy, she said she sat down. That was the last time she ever spoke to you about walking in the park.
That was the last time she ever spoke to me about walking, period.
And that way, second time was early November.
That yes, it was like the first week of November or so.
Now, were you aware of whether or not she went on as she went in the end of November, Thanksgiving time, to a baby shower and a trip to Disneyland down to Southern California?
Yes, that was at Thanksgiving time.
Did Lacy talk to you during that time about anything to do with walking while she was at Disneyland?
What she told me was that she didn't even want to go to Disneyland because she wasn't feeling well. Her feet were swelling. She knew she couldn't walk around the park, so she knew it was not going to be fun for her, and she didn't really want to go at all.
But she did tell you, did she actually go on the trip? Do you know?
Yes, she did. When she came home, she told me they rented a wheelchair and Scott had pushed her around Disneyland in the wheelchair.
The day now is probably a good time to talk about their dog. Are you familiar with their dog?
Yes.
It's a golden retriever.
Yes, I am. I've taken care of him many times.
Okay, so at times when they would go on trips or whatnot, Lacy would bring the dog over to your house.
Yes, Lacy or Scott.
And how big do you think the dog is? Do you have any idea?
Weight wise?
No, he's big, but he's a normal golden retriever sized dog.
Yes.
And have you ever actually walked the dog?
Yes, I have, or he walked me.
I was going to ask you about that. Is he the kind of dog that, is trained kind of obedience that will heel right next to you the whole time and do whatever you want?
No.
Okay. Can you explain what would happen when you would go take Mackenzie out for a normal walk? How does that go? Can you describe how the dog reacted? Was he the type of dog that ever tried to pull you along?
Yes, if there was a bush he wanted to smell, he'd run towards the bush. If there was a dog he wanted to check out, he would run toward the dog. I'd really have to hold on to the leash.
And you personally walk the dog, right?
Yes.
Now, we've talked kind of at length already about, with other witnesses about Lacy's inheritance, but there's just a couple pictures I want to show you about that. Okay. I have three. 18 is Lacy at the baby shower. Okay. How many do you have? Three? 18, 19, and 20? Uh-huh. They're all going to be Lacy at the baby shower. Okay. I assume you've seen these photographs, ma'am?
Yes, I have.
I just don't know which ones they are. They're all photographs of Lacy at the baby shower. Let me show you here. People's 20. A witness describes seeing Lacy on the 23rd. Seeing her, you could kind of see her tattoo from the pants she's wearing. Does that picture show her tattoo?
Yes, it does.
And can you just describe it for the court?
It was a sunflower
And where was it? Where was it? On what part of her body?
on her left ankle or just be above her left ankle.
And for the record, that is a picture of your daughter.
Yes, it is.
Here's another picture of Lacy at the baby shower, and she's wearing kind of a diamond pendant. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
To your knowledge, did Lacy inherit a diamond pendant?
Yes, there was a diamond.
And finally, here's another picture of her wearing kind of a big sapphire ring. Do you know if she inherited that sapphire ring also?
I never saw that ring before.
Okay, you've never seen Lacy wear that.
No,
And this baby shower, these pictures, this was one you did not attend.
that's correct.
May I approach? No, that's all right. I can do it on the record. The one with the sapphire ring was people's 19, and the one with the tattoo was people's 20, and then people's 18 was the other one. Okay. And for the record, this baby shower, you recognize the people that are there.
I recognize two people,
Okay.
Susan and Janie and Lacy, of course.
Right. Who are Susan and Janie?
Susan is Scott's sister and Janie is his sister-in-law.
Okay. And when the baby shower that they went down to in Southern California, who put that on?
I'm not really sure. It was Scott's family, I assume.
Okay, now I asked you about the affair and you were not aware of Scott Peterson having an affair with any woman, is that right?
That is correct.
Let me ask you about his boat. Did you know at any time that Scott Peterson had bought a boat? I
No.
think you said no. Okay, let me just show you. Let me just show you this picture of the boat. This is People's 21. Do you recognize the truck that's in that picture?
Yes, I do.
And whose truck was that?
That was Scott's.
And do you recognize the boat in that picture?
No, not prior to seeing it in the picture.
Okay, other than seeing media accounts or media pictures, had you ever seen that boat at any time?
No.
We talked kind of about, November. I want to move now kind of into December. Up until that time, in December, you were having your normal relationship with Lacy.
Yes.
And did you have dinner with Lacy on the defendant on December 15?
Yes, we did at their house.
Whose house did you go to?
To Scott and Lacy's house.
Okay, and what happened during that conversation? I mean, what happened during that dinner?
I remember Lacy talking about Scott was going to make lasagna, but he didn't get home in time, so she bought a lasagna. And she was a little disappointed in that because she likes to make things. We had talked about Ron, and I had gone fishing that morning, and that was a big surprise because I don't do that. And Lacy mentioned.
Okay, let me stop you there. Is Ron a big fisherman?
Yes, he is.
And I mean, is that kind of one of his main hobbies?
Yes.
How would you characterize him as a fisherman? I mean, as his hobbies?
Every weekend, any chance he gets.
That's kind of the main thing he likes to do,
Yes.
other than his job and whatnot.
Yes.
And so that morning he had actually taken you out fishing.
Yes, it was cold and windy that morning, and I did decide to go with him. I didn't actually fish because I didn't have a fishing license, and I asked him how much the fine would be, so I decided not to be. I took a chair and read the newspaper instead.
Okay, did you go somewhere in the county?
Yes, we went over by Oakdale off Orange Blossom Road.
And Oakdale is the town that's what, just kind of east of Modesto,
Yes,
still in the county.
yes,
And you fished there that morning.
yes.
So anyway, this conversation came up at dinner.
Yes, and Lacy was really surprised that I had even gone fishing with Ron.
So you talked about that. At that point, then, was any mention made of the defendant fishing or the defendant having a boat or maybe taking Ron out on the boat? Or was there any mention of the boat at all at that time?
None whatsoever.
Go ahead.
We talked a couple minutes. The conversation was a couple of minutes long easily, and we were sitting. Ron was sitting next to me, and myself and Scott, and then Lacy. So everyone, yeah.
The defendant didn't make any mention of the boat
No,
or fishing or anything of that nature.
no,
Did Lacy make any mention of the boat?
no.
Okay, go from the 15th to the 23rd. Did you have your normal relationship contacts with Lacy?
Lacy called on the 16th, asked if I would come over and feed the dog and the cats. They were going to Carmel with Jackie and Lee Peterson. They were leaving on the 17th, returning on the 19th.
Okay, let me stop you just for the record. Who are Jackie and Lee Peterson?
Scott's parents.
Okay, what was the date again? I missed the date.
She called me on the 16th.
On December 16th.
That's correct.
Thank you. So she talked about feeding the dog and the animals,
Yes.
and they had a dog, correct?
One dog and two cats.
Two cats, and you did that?
Yes, normally she would have brought the dog over, and I asked her why she wasn't bringing him over, and she said she felt it would be okay this time. That was a little unusual.
But he stayed at the house this time,
Yes,
at their house.
yes.
And then you did that, and then did she call you when she got back?
I called her on Thursday evening. I believe it was around 7 or so.
I'm sorry, what date?
The 19th.
The 19th?
And we talked for a while. She said she was tired. They had a nice time. I think she said they got home around 1 o'clock that afternoon.
And did she tell you what her plans were for the kind of the rest of the week? She had a doctor's appointment, right?
No, that was the next day. That was the 20th. We talked about that.
Okay.
We talked about her baby shower. She told me that she had a doctor's appointment on the 23rd.
All right.
And after the appointment, they were going to the hospital to pre-register.
Would you like a recess?
No,
Okay. And then on the 23rd, did you actually physically speak to Lacy?
yes,
I mean, did you hear her voice?
yes, I did.
Okay, before we get to that though, did you try to get a hold of her on the 23rd?
Yes, she and I were playing phone tag the entire day. She would phone me and miss me, and I would call her and miss her.
And so you were kind of leaving messages back and forth.
Yes, we were.
And then before we get to that though, when is the last time that you physically saw your daughter, not talk to her on the phone, but actually saw her in person?
December 15th.
And that was at the dinner you told us about?
Yes.
On the 23rd, you spoke to her. I mean, you played kind of phone tag back and forth. And then what happened?
And she called me that evening about 8:30. I was talking to a friend of mine on the other line. I have call waiting, and I clicked over and answered the call, and it was Lacy.
And how long do you think you talked to her?
Oh, maybe a minute or two. She called to tell me that they were coming over the next evening for dinner, Christmas Eve dinner. And I asked her at that time, she had told me that she hadn't. She didn't buy gifts for everybody. That was going to be that evening. I told her that was fine. She had told me that she had gone to the doctor that day. Everything was fine. The doctor said her pregnancy was normal. There weren't any problems.
Okay, this conversation, since she clicked in on call waiting, it was fairly brief.
Yes.
And then was that the last time that you ever spoke to Lacy?
Yes.
What happened the next day on the 24th?
When Scott called, or what was I doing?
Well, before we get there, did you hear from Lacy at all during the day?
No, I thought about calling her. I went to see a movie later or early afternoon with a friend of mine, and many times Lacy would come with us. I would ask her to join us, but I didn't call her that day because I knew she had been having problems. She wasn't comfortable. She wasn't comfortable sitting for long periods of time. She was in the later stage of her pregnancy and she just wasn't comfortable, so I decided not to call her.
And you were expecting her at your home for dinner.
At 6 o'clock that evening, yes.
And what time did you get home on the 24th, where you were home and kind of getting the dinner ready and that kind of thing?
I don't remember exactly what time it was. I'm thinking the movie was around 1 or so. So it was probably 3:30 when I got home. I remember at one point when I was putting things together, I realized I didn't have whipping cream. So I asked Ron to call Lacy and to stop on her way over and pick that up.
To your knowledge, did Ron do that?
Yes, he did, and there was no answer. So he left a message for her to do that,
Okay.
asking her to pick up the whipping cream.
And then at some point you got a call from Scott Peterson, is that right?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember what time of night that was?
I remember looking at the clock on my stove in the kitchen and it was 5:15. And I remember thinking that I needed to get myself together because everybody was supposed to be there at 6 o'clock. So it was another minute or so when I walked down the hall to my bedroom. And then when I get into the bedroom is when the phone rang. So I would say it was about 5:17. I recall the time.
Tell the jury, just tell us what happened.
When he called, he said, "Hi, Mom." He said, "Is Lacy there with you or over there?" And I said, "No." And he said that her car is there, was there in the driveway, and the dog was in the backyard with the leash on, and Lacy was missing. I remember telling him to call her friends to see if anybody had seen or talked to her that day. I just thought that maybe she was with one of her friends. But I remember hanging up the phone and walking back towards the door of the bedroom to walk down the hall. I was going to tell Ron, and that's when I realized he said that she was missing, and I just knew. I knew she was missing. He wouldn't have used the word missing. I mean, most people when they would call, they would say,
Okay. And then after you talked or walked down and you told Ron,
I didn't walk down, I ran down at that point.
okay, what happened then?
I started to change my clothes. I was waiting for him to call back, and he called back within just a few minutes and said that none of her friends had seen her. So I told him to check with the neighbors to see if maybe she was at one of the neighbors' house, thinking maybe she had taken cookies or something to one of the neighbors.
Uh-huh.
And so we hung up at that time, and I remember changing my clothes at that time. I was already dressing warmer because I just felt I knew something was wrong, and I knew that I felt I needed to go to the park because he said the dog has his leash on. So my first thought is she would have been walking the dog.
Okay, hold it. Let me stop you for a second. So he since called 2 times, right?
Yes.
Keep going then.
The third time he called, he said the neighbors hadn't seen her. Nobody had seen her. And I told him I was going to go to the park. And I believe it was after the second call that I had told Ron to call the hospitals and the police because I just knew something was wrong. Then after the third,
Okay, you've been asking or talking in a narrative. Let's shorten it down. I'll shorten it down, okay? After the third call, what's the next thing that you did? You called somebody.
Ron had called 911. They told him to stay at the house and that an officer would come to the house. And when I came out of the room, I wasn't going to wait. I called my friend Sandy to pick me up because I knew that Ron couldn't drive, and she picked me up. I called her. It was 5:32. I know from my cell phone records.
What was you said you knew Ron couldn't drive, so your demeanor at this point was you were pretty upset.
Yes,
And what is Sandy, just for the record, what's her full name?
Sandy Rickard.
And what happened next then? Did Sandy come and get you?
Sandy picked me up. We drove over to the park. As we were driving over the bridge on Oakdale Road, I called Scott and told him to meet us at the tennis courts. We were going down into that area.
Okay, let me stop you there. I'm going to put a diagram up. So if you can, at least explain to the jury where you went. Are you going this way? Let's just for a second. Let's show you an aerial of the park area. First of all, do you recognize that aerial view park?
Yes, I do.
Can you show us where the defendant's residence was located? Is that on the diagram?
That would be right here.
Okay, we'll start right here. Thank you. And just for the record, that's marked in red with a 523. And Ms. Rocha for Covina Avenue is also marked on there.
Yes,
And that's the street where Lacy and the defendant lived.
yes.
Before we get to what happened when you met him down there at the park, let me go back and have you do something since we have the aerial up now. Can you show the jury, you can use this red pen I'm going to give you. Can you show the jury where it was while the 2 times that you walked with Lacy? Okay, and I apologize, I didn't even introduce you to Pam. It says answer, but her name is Pam, and she's the director at Humphreys College in up north. They're an online recording program. And a couple of her students joined us, but I don't see it. Oh yeah, Melissa.
Melissa and Natasha.
And Natasha. So nice to meet both of you, and thank you for coming. And we'll do it again, and we'll do some Pam and I talked about doing some live for voice maybe in the future. So yeah. So
yeah, it was a little awkward in places. That the colloquy, it kind of wasn't real obvious where the colloquy was as far as like reading.
It was a little crazy, but we got through it.
Yeah.
So
nice.
Okay, so we got a new group coming in, and we're gonna do multi-voice now. So, anyways, testing. So,
What multi-voice do you guys do now? 2 voice, 3 voice, 4 voice?
We do. I do a light board. I do a 200, a 180, a 160, and a 140.
4 voice.
That's how we give the tests.
Oh, great. All righty. Yep. Well, we'll try to pull it together where we can do some live 4 voice practice.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Have a good day. Good night. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Okay, let me write down who's here. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna start with so this is gonna be 200, 160, 180, 140. Okay, is anybody that I'm looking at right now want to be in the lab instead? Or you guys wanna all hang out? You can. Okay. Perfect, let me make sure there's no one in the, let me do a broadcast. Hello? I hope you can hear me, but I'm going to start 4 voice now. So if anybody's interested in being in the 4 voice, we're getting started. Thank you. Okay. All right, so let me take roll first. Okay. So we are on 108 as far as tests go for the qualifiers. Done. Oh, it's actually going to be 109. because there is no 108. Okay, and I'm sharing it with Ruby, Felicia, and Olivia. Oops. Okay, so after I
You're still recording?
share.
You're still recording?
Oh, yeah, I'll stop recording. Let me fix these people on. Deanna, are you here? Oh, yeah, you are. Okay. I need to fix that qualifier list. It's 109 now. No. Okay, saving that. Saving that. No, I don't want to save it. Okay. That. All right.